Okay, continuing on, I was talking about the selective colour and the exposure, I should say. And a little trick that you can do to really make the colours pop is with the exposure sometimes is to look at the water rather than the sky for a second, and you'll see as I slide this up, it really starts to get some vibrance about it. Looking at the sky, you can see the downside is that it blows out a little bit. Now, a little trick that you can do, and that's probably where exposure should be. If I just bring it up to possibly there, so the sky is a little bit blown out, and then I go back into selective colour, whites in the black, and then I can actually pull back down the sky. So what I've essentially done is brighten this whole area here by overexposing and then bringing back with selective colour. So we've basically got, oh, hang on, behind that panel there it was a little bit overexposed here, I can see. So I'll just pull this out for a second. And I'm going to need to come back more in the sky. Okay, so because I've had to pull it back so much, what I might do is, so modifying the exposure layer and selective colour, I'll just come back before that and see which one looks better. There's a few contrast issues in the water here that I can see. So while the sky looks good, what I might do is just come back to the exposure layer and bring it down a tiny bit. It's still overexposed a bit there. And then pull that down. So what I'm trying to do at the moment is do a half measure. And go to history. No, I still like it back here, I think. Where is it? Certainly not there. Yep, so it's still blown out there though. So I need to continue with this. And back in selective colour. So basically you can see the more I drag it down, this area in here is really suffering from that. So it's essentially not something that I can do too much. Okay, so adding a bit of cyan. There we go. So now we've got a good balance in between it not blowing out and brightness in the water, so I'm happy with that. Took a little bit, but yeah, so now the colours are quite vibrant and really popping. So the next layer to do, still focused on tones, is the curves. Now essentially what I was just doing, I'll bring this out because this is an area that needs an area of focus. So highlights, shadows and midtones. That's kind of where you really need to be looking for doing tones. Now that selective color tweak that I showed you, that's kind of an advanced technique, and most of the time you don't need to do that. This one works very well. So basically, click in the middle and then drag this up and down, and what you're effectively doing is adjusting the midtones once again. And it's just another area of control, which works a little bit different to exposure. Up here, this is adjusting the highlights. So if I drag this, you can see that it's the highlights now that I'm affecting, and out there. So we've pushed it up a little bit, and because this is blowing out right on the very high of the highlight, you can even click again and go more into the highlights. And I'm just going to try and bring that down a touch, like that. Down at this end, we're now looking at the shadows. And that's not too bad. It's still quite contrasty in here between, it's contrasty. So the way to tackle that is to come in again. So you can see that that's an exaggeration of what I'm talking about. And that's not contrast. That's not contrasty, that's quite flat. So, and that's kind of where I want it. I don't want too much contrast in that area. So you do get a fair amount of extra control with the curves. So I'll just turn that off and turn that on. You can see that it's a vast difference that we've been able to do with that. I've actually lost a fair bit in the midtones. So I'll just come back in. No, can't do that. Start to do that, it starts to look odd. So about there. We might come back into selective color, come back into the neutrals, and have a look in here. Try and bring some of that mid-tone back. And it's a fine line between the people here looking odd, while that looks great. You could selectively mask, I suppose, to get more control, but generally I don't have time for that, unless it's really bad. So, and come back into curves again. Let's look at this one here. So as you can see, I'm just focused on tone at the moment, rather than trying to tackle everything at once. I haven't touched colour at all, reds, yellows, etc. It's purely been tone, and the image is not far off from being finished, you would think. There are more adjustments that I'm about to get into. Alright, so I'm going to leave the panel there, just so that I can see here. The next one to do is a colour balance. So essentially, it's kind of like the colour cast of selective colour. It gives you an extra control for colour casts. So it's a good one to just add into the mix. I would say a lot of the time that you don't really get a lot of benefit from it. You get a lot of benefit particularly at dawn and dusk shots. That's not to say that any image won't benefit from it, and you really don't know until you actually get in and edit each photo to see if you're going to get a result from this filter, I suppose. So I'm just going through midtones, then shadows, and now highlights. And I'm just looking. I've got a fairly trained eye. It really is just making it look as natural as possible and removing color casts. So I'm looking in the sky, seeing if it's a little bit blue, seeing if it's a little bit yellow, whichever way. Okay. So if I turn that off and on, yeah, that was worth doing. I can see that there is a bit of a yellow color cast across everything, and it's now into the blue and looking more vibrant overall. The next layer adjustment to do from here is vibrance. So we'll come into vibrance and move this slider up and start saturating it with color. And because we've done all of these other adjustments, it's not that far off. Some with other images you'll find that the vibrance finally makes the image look good. In this instance, I'm not needing a heck of a lot, and you'll generally find that you basically use both of these sliders. So saturation you'll only need to do in the order of about 0 to 20, somewhere there, and then it starts to become oversaturated, if at all. Sometimes you don't even need saturation, sometimes you do. And I can see that it's not really having a lot of benefit. So turning that off and on. In this case, it's a very minor adjustment. Okay, so that's color once again. Next, we want to go into back into selective color. So with vibrance, that is moving now into color. Before that, we were just doing tone. I suppose color balance as well. This is where we start to move into color. So color balance, vibrance, and now I'm going to go back into my selective color, and I'm going to do from red down to magenta. So starting with red and working our way down, it's simply a case of picking out. So at the moment I'm looking at the girl and I'm looking at her skin tones. Because that's the main area where red is going to be affecting things, and using her skin tones as a reference point for setting the reds for the whole image. Next, yellows. Yellows is mainly in the trees. So moving the sliders again, once again. With a focus on the luminance of the trees, you can really find that you can tame the reflection of the trees coming back at the camera lens by adjusting this, adjusting these sliders. Greens, sometimes you'll get nothing, sometimes you will get a lot. Most of the times you will get nothing, and I can see that nothing's really happening in this image. Cyans for the water. So I might just move this over to here. So about there. And the blues. Nothing really going on in the blues in this image. Magentas, most